Hey, what is happening everybody? How are you guys doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and welcome back. So one of the coolest pieces of news that's come out this past week from PAX, which just concluded, is the reveal of some actual gameplay from Wolfenstein 2 for the Nintendo Switch. And I discussed it on my last video. The game has been in a really interesting situation because it was announced before the original release on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC back in October, but it was announced as a game coming after that release date. So it was like a brand new, unreleased, third-party multi-platform game confirmed to be coming to the Switch, which we have seen not enough of that happening. And so it was really, really cool. Super exciting to see that game confirmed, also right alongside the announcement of Doom as well at that time. But of course, it did come with the caveat of being announced for some time in the future. That PS4, PC, and Xbox One version was going to launch, and then we were going to have to wait and wonder when we might see the Switch version of the game. And now that we have seen it, thanks to PAX gameplay this week, everyone is super impressed. Everyone is very happy. Again, even when I discussed it on that last video, pretty much the main reason I wanted to discuss it was because it looks so good, and that was part of the mystery of the game. We all knew it was very graphically intensive, it was a very impressive looking and running game, and while we had been seeing more and more signs of exactly how capable the Switch was, especially with the release of Doom, for example, still I think a lot of us were a little bit, wondering and curious and maybe even nervous on if the game would be worth it to release on the Switch. Maybe it wasn't going to look or run well enough to justify the game existing, or maybe something was just going to prevent the game from ultimately being developed and released. So it was really great to see that the game is still going, didn't fall apart behind the scenes, and boy oh boy, does it look fantastic. Now, another conversation has cropped up, however, due to the footage of this game finally being released. And, some people are talking about whether or not it still looks good enough, or, despite the fact that it looks so great and is running so well, is it still more proof that ultimately the Switch still just can't get a lot of the graphical intensive things done compared to its competitors? Now, it's a worthy point to bring up for sure. It's great to see games like Doom, like Skyrim, like LA Noire, like Wolfenstein 2, coming to the Nintendo Switch. These are games, and games like these should all be coming to the Switch at this point, man. There is no reason for most games, third-party, multi-plat, whatever, there are no reasons to really be keeping these games from the Nintendo Switch. It makes no sense. The Switch is selling so well. Everything that releases on it, most things I should say, do sell incredibly well, first party and third party. And everyone's jumping on board. The indie scene is blowing up thanks to the eShop. I mean, there's really a lot going on that should be persuading more companies to want to release their games on the Switch than to not. I guess the only reason to not do it would be if your game absolutely could never, ever, ever run on the Nintendo Switch hardware, which is probably a game like Anthem. I'm just kind of guessing. Maybe there's a way to do it, but something tells me that's the kind of game where it's like, yeah, the Switch is great and capable, but at the same time, you ain't gonna get that Anthem running on the system, and that's fine. But for the most part, you guys know what I'm saying. Every game should be considered for the Nintendo Switch, and no developer should be ruling it out for their games in the future when it makes sense. And that's how another conversation is really kind of cropping up here with the confirmation and the reveal of this Wolfenstein footage. A lot of people are starting to talk about still, are we seeing a situation where the graphics aren't really living up to what people want out of these third-party games? Now, people's defense to this argument is what's really interesting and what really made me want to talk about this. We're seeing a lot of people, as the conversation about the graphical capability of the Switch continues, and if it's good enough or not, which it totally is, but still, some people might be on the side that the graphic capability isn't enough. So some people might have that argument, but the counter-argument is, well, hey, I still get these games portably on my Nintendo Switch. I get a game like Wolfenstein or Doom or Skyrim or what have you. I get a game like that in my hand that I can take anywhere in the world, anywhere in my house. I can take it to work, I can take it to school, I can take it on vacation, and it doesn't need to be hooked up to a TV, and it can look fantastic, and it can run very well. It can run and look serviceably enough, I should say. And that's the argument that a lot of people are making, mostly Nintendo fans or Switch fans, of course, who want to say, hey, it's great that these games are coming. Yet still some people will say, hey, it doesn't look good enough. Oh my gosh, compare Doom on the Switch to Doom on the PC. It looks like a bunch of potato sacks running around. It doesn't look as good as it does, and the frame rate and the refractive lighting and all these different things. Whatever. I mean, that's the whole argument, is like games don't look as good on the Switch. And you know what? I mean, that's true for the most part, sure. And until a lot of us actually get our hands on Wolfenstein and really have our own personal time with the game to understand how it looks and runs, you know, we're just going to have to assume that, yeah, it's probably not going to look quite as good as its competing counterparts on the PS4, Xbox One, and PC. But that portable conversation is an interesting conversation, you know. Basically, it makes you wonder, is it worth it to sacrifice some graphics for the ability of portability? Now, of course, this is subjective, and everyone could have a different stance on this topic, so I'm not trying to speak for everybody, but I feel like I can cover a pretty wide swath of gamers, and definitely of Nintendo Switch gamers at the very least. And if we talk about, is it worth sacrificing some graphics for the sake of portability, I'll tell you, my personal opinion is that, yeah, I think that it totally is. That is why the Switch exists and why it does what it does and why it's so popular and people are enjoying it. Because it adds this amazing new dimension to how we can game. And it's crazy because it's actually a really simple idea. Like, it's groundbreaking in the sense that really no one has ever done or offered this, but I feel like when you look at the Switch's ability to be on your TV or portable within an instant, I feel like on paper that idea is kind of simple and kind of obvious and maybe isn't that groundbreaking. I think it's really the execution of it that makes it feel groundbreaking, and the fact that, honestly, after so many decades of gaming, it had never been done before, at least to this degree. I mean, you can talk about Super Game Boys all you want. That's not the same thing, really, as what the Switch is. And so that is the selling point to the Nintendo Switch experience, is the fact that you can do this. And so for a lot of people, including myself, we say, hey, yes, I can buy Wolfenstein 2 on X date, and I can just have it on my PS4, my Xbox One, or my PC, and I'm going to have it always attached to my TV, always attached to my computer monitor, and that's fine. And I'll have the game, and I'll enjoy it if it's good, and there you go. But a lot of us are also willing to say, man, but you know what, 5 or 6 months down the road, if I can get a Switch version that, yeah, it won't look quite as good, but it'll be on my Switch and I can take it anywhere and play it on my break at work or between classes at school or whatever, you know what? I would rather have that ability than the slightly better graphics of the other versions. I think a lot of people feel that way. And so, you know, the whole point to this conversation is, A, to share my opinion, which is that I personally think that the portability most times will be worth the graphic power. But at the same time, people can feel and want and desire other things and have a different approach to this. And sure, maybe somebody's like, well, the Switch is dumb in the first place, so why sacrifice graphics for portability? And I mean, people have that right. I think what kind of is unfortunate is when, and we're used to this, unfortunately, but is when people get mean about it and they start saying, oh, you're dumb if you'd be willing to sacrifice graphics for portability. Portability isn't worth anything, but look at how many polygons are on the nostril of my main character. It's so impressive. There's another part to this conversation that has to do with the release date structure of this, the whole day and date conversation, and I think I've decided I also want to make a video on that topic exactly. So I think that might be the next video, or one of the next videos I make soon discussing that. I don't want to bring that into this conversation just yet. But when we still boil it back down to this idea of, hey, a lot of Switch games, if we're going to get these multi-platform games, we might have to sacrifice some of the visuals, but we get the benefit of portability. Now, one thing that can't be discounted here, though, and I don't care what anyone says about the graphics of the Switch and if they're good enough or if they're not good enough, one thing that cannot be discounted is how unbelievably amazing and impressive it is that the Switch can even run these games in the first place. Like, I get that the PC graphics snobs are going to turn their nose up at the idea of sacrificing any visuals for any reason. I just don't care. But screw those people, man. The Switch, this tiny little portable thing, can run Doom and Wolfenstein and who knows what other incredible games we're going to see over the next couple of years. That is mind-blowing. That is absolutely worthy of taking note of. And it's very commendable to what Nintendo did and the technology and ingenuity that went into the Switch hardware, man. I don't care if there's 1,000 more God rays in the PC version of Wolfenstein 2. The damned game can run on the Switch, and it looks really, really good. I think the average person looking at direct feed footage online wouldn't necessarily know the difference between the PS4, Xbox One, or Switch version of that game. I just don't believe it. Yeah, maybe if you really studied and you watched half an hour straight and you really thought about it, you might be able to ultimately determine, okay, this one is a little bit less good looking. But ultimately, at first glance, you look at a minute or two of footage of that game, you don't know the difference. It looks that good. And so I think that's why at the end of the day, people who enjoy the Switch are willing to say, you know what? It's so impressive that this kind of experience can happen on the Switch, which is this tiny device, as I was just saying, that it's worth sacrificing those graphics, not to mention the portability. So it's a cyclical conversation and a cyclical argument that I probably don't even need to add too much more to. But I think it was interesting here on the couple of days following the reveal of footage for Wolfenstein, as this graphics conversation has popped up a little bit. I haven't seen a huge sort of kerfuffle happening here, but I've seen a couple of tweets and conversations, some conversations in comment sections on videos and my videos and other videos about Wolfenstein, where some people are still discussing it like, oh, it doesn't look good enough, I don't want to sacrifice the power. And then other people start chiming in, yeah, but it's portable on the Switch, and I think that that's worth it. And then the other people will fire back, well, I don't think it's worth it because portability is dumb, I want the better graphics on my PC or whatever. And so that's the debate happening, and so really I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and chime in with my thoughts, man. You know, graphics versus portability, that's probably going to be the title of this video here. Everyone will have a different opinion, but I feel very comfortable saying that for me, and I think for most gamers and most Switch fans, that the portability is worth it. We will sacrifice some graphics because playing the game is always more important than looking at the game. I think that that's an important thing to remember here. And I think that that should apply across the board. I mean, it's hard to say that it's a fact and not an opinion. I don't really think that's fair, but it's really close to being true, I think. Like, how you experience the game, how you play the game, where you play the game, how it controls and feels, that will always and should always be more important than the actual visuals and graphics of a game. Now, to be fair, though, and to be completely honest with you guys about who I am in my opinion here, I do still think great graphics are nice, they're very welcome, and when you want to talk about a game having the best possible visuals, yes, that is a good thing. And sometimes great graphics or the best graphics or whatever can aid in the experience when you're playing a game. Absolutely. I don't want to discount graphics like they don't matter at all, because they certainly do. And like, hey, if I could mold my perfect version of Wolfenstein 2 on the Switch, for example, or any Switch multi-platform game, yeah, I would like to be able to also put the best graphics possible into that version. Sure, I would very much like that, but I don't need that because that portable ability still ultimately becomes the defining factor, and I think is just cooler and more interesting than having the best graphics possible. I think part of the reason I can even feel that way, and a lot of other older gamers would probably be able to share this sentiment, my fellow older gamer in our 30s would probably be able to also feel this way, and that's that I've already lived through the time where newer graphics and better improving graphics literally were the thing that made games better. At the time, going from the 8-bit into 16-bit era, and the 16-bit into the 32, 64, 3D graphics era, and even up into that 6th gen, the GameCube, PS2, Xbox era, all of those generational jumps had amazing shifts in graphics. And at those times, that was the difference maker. I mean, there were advances in the controller technology too, adding more face buttons, adding the shoulder buttons, adding the analog stick, the most important gaming revolution of all time, in my opinion. That is the innovation that is probably made the biggest impact. But those things were happening as well, and they did matter. But also, I mean, when you played Metroid on the NES, and then Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo, or Zelda on the NES, and then A Link to the Past on the Super NES, and you can make those comparisons all day long, when you made those jumps, the graphics mattered, and the games were better and more fun and more exciting just because of the graphics, let alone all the things you could do within them. And so I've lived through those times, and that was great, and I love those times. I have fond memories of being a kid and a teenager through those graphical leaps. But nowadays, throughout the past 2 or 3 generational shifts, I feel like the graphics thing, it just doesn't matter now like it did back then. I think that's really the reason I can look at it that way. So it's like, okay, I've been through the graphical jumps. Now I'm at the point where graphics they don't matter to me as much, and I really care about how I play my game, where I play my game, what it feels like to play my game, what the controls are like, what the execution of the gameplay mechanics are. that has far exceeded any need for amazing graphics in my games. And so, to bring this back down to the main point and end this conversation, that's one of the many reasons why it really makes sense for myself and a lot of gamers to trade the best graphics of this version of the game for the portability nature of what the Switch offers. That is the X factor to the Switch. And so at this point, based on what I'm seeing from Wolfenstein, which Wolfenstein kind of became the default example game in this conversation, but this applies to previous third-party games to the Switch and will definitely apply to all the future third-party releases we get as well. So, for myself, when it comes to Wolfenstein, that is the reason I'm very glad to have waited for the game, and I'm very happy with my decision, because all the footage I'm seeing basically justifies my decision. Like, wow, they did it. Wolfenstein looks awesome. It's delivering like we wanted to. It looks probably better than a lot of us thought it was going to. Provided the frame rate stays stable throughout the game, that would be the one thing that kind of would sort of break the idea here. But if it stays stable and it looks as good as it does, hey, I didn't mind waiting a couple of months. I had plenty of other games to play. Now we're getting to kind of a drought season for myself. There's only a few games I'm looking forward to in the next couple of months, like God of War and Dark Souls Remastered on the Switch. That's about it. But also, this Wolfenstein game, if it comes out soon, great. I made a smart decision to wait because now I have this new Switch version of this game and I can play this laying in bed before I fall asleep or hanging out with my girlfriend in the living room, and I don't have to be separated in here. I can be hanging out on our couch while she's watching something or on her computer, on her laptop, and then I've got my Switch playing me some Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. Think about that, haters. Wolfenstein 2 in my hand, in my living room on my couch. Bing, bang, boom. It's going to be great. Anyway, it's really pretty excited here about this whole Wolfenstein thing. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of my conversation about this concept. I think it's interesting as we're still in this zeitgeist period of the Switch being so new and exciting, and we're seeing more great games announced and coming to the Switch, like Dark Souls, like Wolfenstein 2, and I think many more surprises before the end of the year. I still want to believe in Call of Duty, man. I want to believe in that game. It might be not happening, but you never know. So either way, what do you guys think when you compare the graphics to the portability conversation? And some people feel graphics make the difference. Other people feel portability makes the difference. Here I am at the end of this video. My mouth is falling apart. Some people feel, you know, different sides of this conversation. So what do you guys think? Do you think the portability is the X factor? Or do you say, hey, I don't want to trade graphics for portability. I prefer the best looking game possible, you know? All opinions are welcome, like I like to say, so definitely discuss below. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.